Welcome to Big City, Small Town, the weekly podcast all about San Antonio and the people who make it go and grow. I'm your host, Bob Rivard. This week's guest is David Marquez, the Executive Director of Economic and Community Development for Bexar County. With 27 years, almost 28 years of working for the county, he's a longtime leader in economic development and advanced manufacturing, including cross-border auto manufacturing for the county. Marquez also oversaw the building and funding of the AT&T Arena. That was about 2002, I think, now renamed the Frost Bank Center. David Marquez, welcome to Big City, Small Town.
Good to see you, my friend. It's been a while, you know.
It has been, and for people that don't know you or your work at the county over all those years, tell us a little bit at the outset, David, about yourself personally and whether you're from here or how you came here. Your whole life story in 2 minutes.
That can be done, you know. You don't get more San Antonian than me because I was born about 4 blocks that way, and I live a block and a half behind me.
4 blocks that way must have been the
downtown Baptist.
Okay.
Yeah. And I live, at the Majestic Towers there, a block and a half away, and I work 2 blocks that way, and I have another office over here. So I tell people I'm going to probably have to be buried downtown because everything about me.
Do you have a car?
I do have a car, yeah. I have a Tundra. Of course, you have to have a Tundra, Toyota Tundra in my line of work.
HO in San Antonio.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's been great, and I love my city very, very much. I think I'm probably, familiar with just about every part of town that hasn't been built in the last 10 years. There's so much growth on the suburban edges of town that it's hard to keep up with. But I love driving around through neighborhoods I've never been through and just really love San Antonio. It's a remarkable place. I've never lived anywhere else, but I've visited many, many places. And I will say we are certainly unique. I think we used to use that term to describe San Antonio more often than we do, or perhaps we should, because this is a unique city. There's no question about it. So I went to high school here, East Central High School. I lived on the southeast side growing up.
Go Buttons?
No, the East Central. East Central. The Hornets. The Mighty Hornets. Yeah, not Central Catholic.
Okay.
Not a part of the mafia, but East Hornets. Central. Yeah, the Mighty Hornets. That's us. And my parents both worked at Kelly. So the classic moved into the middle class because of the good jobs that the federal government had here. My brother worked there as well for a while, and my mom said, well, you got to get a job at Kelly. It'll never go away. And so I did. I became a machinist. I was a machine tool operator apprentice, went through a 2-year Department of Labor apprenticeship program at Kelly and worked there for 11 years, 7 years in the machine shop. And then I started wanting to go back to school. So 15 years after high school, I got a bachelor's degree at Southwest Texas State, now Texas State University. They used to have a program at Kelly where they offered classes there. And so we only went to the campus maybe a few semesters on a couple of nights. I say we because there were other colleagues of mine that were going through the same program. And then I got into the master's program at Trinity, Urban Administration, that our friend Lou Fox was running.
Former city manager of San Antonio under Henry Cisneros.
Yeah, long time, very progressive city manager. And I don't, honestly, Bob, I wish I could tell you how I wound up there. I wasn't thinking, hey, I want to be in city government, or I don't even remember exactly. Maybe it was something at Kelly that got me involved in that program. But I went over there, and it's been a fantastic ride ever since. It really did change my trajectory all along.
A lot of our really strongest leaders are products of the Trinity program, and our city manager, Eric Walsh, the only place he's worked since graduating from Trinity is the city. You must have some interesting feelings, your whole family, David, about watching the sort of resurrection of Kelly as Port San Antonio and all the job creation and smart job creation and advanced manufacturing that's happening out there today.
Yeah, the product that I used to work on, the T56 engine, is still worked on by Standard Aero. It's never left Kelly. It was privatized in those days. And, there was certainly, I think that's probably, there's a story in there somewhere, because I recognize how much more efficient Standard Aero was able to do the work than we were at Kelly. It was I think, a time of transition. We were into the peace dividend at the end of the Cold War under the Clinton administration, and closing down bases and consolidation was a really big topic of conversation. It's why my brother left. He was tired of the reduction in force or the RIF conversations. So he wanted a job that would never go away. He became a SAPD patrol officer, and he recently retired from that and did a great career. His son is a police officer, and his other son is a police officer in Shirts.
Wow, good for all of them and everyone in your family.
Yeah. So I think that the work that happens at Port San Antonio is important. But for me, when I look at it, Bob, and I think about our current strategy around advanced manufacturing and all of the amazing things that happened that Henry Cisneros and others, Nelson Wolf and others put in place working to get Toyota here ultimately, couldn't have happened if Kelly didn't close down, because they were a strong competitor for that labor force. So there are, as you said, many jobs being created at Port San Antonio, some still in aerospace, but it's certainly a transition. To my way of thinking, there's sort of two primary schools of thought in economic development. I think we've had this chat before, maybe on a sidewalk as we bumped into each other. But the Richard Florida model of build a great city and really bright, educated people will come and build this great economy for you. And then there's the San Antonio school of thought, which is that we should strive every day to bring economic opportunity to the substantial portion of our population that's underemployed and or unemployed and undereducated. And so advanced manufacturing is a big part of that strategy, in my view.
You mentioned one of the companies out there that's not a household name that's doing the engine work now, but I know among people that look at workforce development that they're especially known for really strong training programs inside their company. So if people are out there listening and wondering where they or their children might apply for a job like that, there's just a lot of great jobs out there that are being created.
Yeah, amazing jobs.
Did you know, David, in the time you were at Kelly, could you sense that it was closing, and that did that motivate you to go back to school because you realized that that wasn't a stable future?
No, that wasn't my motivation. My motivation, bearing my soul here, I was an underachiever in high school, B, C student and middle of the class and just not motivated. My parents had been divorced for a few years, and so didn't have a lot of direction. So worked around, bouncing around just different jobs in auto parts stores and driving for, little mom and pop companies and stuff. And my mom said to encourage me to take the test to get in out there. So I did. But eventually I had the curiosity and I guess the intellectual capacity to do more, but I just didn't have a reason or an outlet for it until later. And actually, it's kind of strange because things in my life, like many people, definitely have come full circle about things. Because the thing that really got me motivated to go back to school was when the Air Force was endeavoring to introduce quality control or total quality management. They called it Quality Air Force. And they were deploying the Toyota method and other, kind of a mix mash of methodologies. But it really caught my interest. So I was reading a lot at the time. I had gotten back into reading, and I was just devouring all kinds of books. Bookstop was my friend, friendly place to go all the time. And I started reading the quality books, and they kind of really motivated me to realize that I could find a career in something other than working with my hands, which I loved the job. I loved the work. The people that do the work, they were all amazing. They still are. I love that kind of noble manufacturing, work, skilled trades. But I was on a different path, apparently.
Well, you're looking at an underachiever from a broken family who had quite a few years of blue-collar work myself before I went back to college as a returning student. And I would argue, David, that your background has probably made you a far more empathetic leader, because many people that have that direct line to college and might come from backgrounds of privilege or the middle class or upper middle class, I don't think really understand the blue-collar labor force and its importance and just their ability to relate to it. And I think it's really important to have leaders that can.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's still remarkable to me. There are a lot of folks who talk about it, but it's sort of like many things, like being homeless, the idea of having lived experience or having a criminal background, having the lived experience changes the way you interact with others. And I do definitely feel blessed that I have that background that's blue collar, not the traditional 12 years of high school or K through 12 and then straight into college. It was nonlinear. And in retrospect, and I'm sure you may feel the same way, I think it's a disservice to encourage every 18-year-old to go to college at all, but certainly not when they're 18. I mean, I understand the logic of it, but I think there's as much damage done by that philosophy as anything else, especially in our community. I don't think that's...
There's a great opportunity for people now to go to enroll in the Alamo colleges, to participate in the Alamo Promises, and if they choose not to go on to a 4-year career, to get a 2-year technical certificate that's aimed squarely at advanced manufacturing and prepares them for one of those really good paying jobs out there where you don't need a college degree to get in the door.
That is certainly a pathway, but I think there's room for improvement there, Bob. Judge Wolf and I, we fought a few battles early on in the early development of SA Works, the local initiative that was funded by Charles Butt largely to help improve our workforce pipelines. Still very important organization and doing great work. But the judge would often say, Judge Wolf would often say that, don't waste your time with a 4-year degree, get a 2-year degree. And I did a little study for him one day, and I brought him down to my office, and I said, Judge, you can't say that. Because here's the thing about it. It matters what you study, because a 2-year degree in philosophy will not get you a career pathway, and a 2-year degree in biology, probably not a lot of job opportunities. So there are a number of very well-paying pathways at Alamo colleges in the 2-year associate's degree program, one of which is in advanced manufacturing. But few are the young people who take those pathways. Many of them, of course, they're doing their 2+2. They're going to go on to some 4-year school. But I look at a lot of resumes in my career, and when I see those folks who have a 2-year associate's degree from here or any 2-year institution, and it doesn't seem to have been a part of their journey, they grew, they learned, they took their freshman comp and their American history classes as well. But as far as the trade part of it, that's a small percentage of the number of people who go to community college. We could do better in this community. I would argue we should be doing much, much better on that front.
That's a good perspective. Well, while we're on the subject of advanced manufacturing, and you mentioned former Mayor Henry Cisneros and his successful efforts to bring Toyota here eventually, I guess under the period of time that either Judge Wolf or maybe Ed Garza was mayor by the time they finally came. Are you worried at all about President Trump's threats to impose 25% tariffs on Mexico and what that could do to the Tacoma and Sequoia manufacturing here, which depends so much on cross-border trade and parts being assembled south and brought up here?
I think if it was any other company, I might be more concerned. I think we should have concerns across other parts of our economy on the Mexico front, tourism, other producers. But Toyota is about as unique and resilient a company as there is in the world. As far as I know, and I could be proven wrong these days, but they have never shut down a manufacturing production facility anywhere in the world ever. The closest thing that I'm aware of is when the GM partnership in California went away because of GM. Mm-hmm. And then they subsequently sold and invested in Tesla to start their operations there. But there's never been a Toyota plant. And this is in plants that are in parts of the world that are in, civil war. And they're still trying to keep those plants up and running and employing people because they want to bring back stability. So I think they're strong and smart enough to figure out how to navigate that for themselves and their supply chain. That's what makes them the world's best automaker, without a doubt, is that they're just so planful and thoughtful about that resiliency. But do I think those tariffs and other potential interventions or whatever that the administration is going to do are worrisome? They're very worrisome for our economy. I mentioned to you that in our pre-conversation that I met our county manager, David Smith, at Trinity when we were attending the program there. And one of the things that he did back in that day, which I still recall, was to analyze the San Antonio economy in relationship to the U.S. economy. And there was virtually no correlation. The U.S. economy would be going one direction and our local economy would be going the other direction. But when he compared it to the peso valuation, this is the 90s, it was lockstep. So as the peso went up, San Antonio's economy went up. The peso was down. We didn't do so well. That's probably less true because we've diversified a bit from the dependence on there. But I would say it's still largely true that our local economy is much more affected by what happens south of the border than, north of the Cibolo Creek or whatever.
I think a more contemporary measure of that interdependence is the fact that we're about, as a country, to hit the $900 billion mark in trade with Mexico, which is our largest trading partner. And the majority of that trade comes through Texas.
I had the privilege to go down to Laredo to speak at a conference, the Pathways to Trade conference that their Laredo Economic Development Corporation puts on maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And I hadn't been to Laredo in a while, certainly maybe 5 or 6 years or whatever. And I was, I have to say, stunned at the amount of cross-border traffic there is there for cargo. You see it because, of course, we're just down the river from them here on 35, 150 miles from that crossing. But when you see it happening there in real time, I would encourage anyone who wants to understand San Antonio's interdependence and the U.S.'s interdependence with Mexico to go down to Laredo, just hang out. You don't have to have a tour of the port. I guess that would be fantastic as well. But just to see the amount of logistics and distribution, the industry, and how it affects that whole city. And it's having a positive effect on them. There are a number of new, very large industrial parks built as you're entering Laredo. Mm-hmm. So in our strategy, as you know, we focus on regional growth, though that growth will benefit San Antonio the same way that the Tesla plant arriving in Austin benefited us tremendously in economic development without much effort on our part.
Well, I don't think anybody could have imagined some decades ago, maybe when you started working for the county or I first came to San Antonio in the late 80s, that the Austin-San Antonio corridor would be the fastest growing population center in the country and Laredo would become the biggest inland port in North America. But here we are.
We're just getting started. I mean, it doesn't feel like there are certainly clouds on the horizon. We all should be concerned about water. We should all be concerned about power. I think we'll resolve those out of necessity. But, it's a good time to be in this area. It's a good time to be an economic developer in this area, and it has been. And that was sort of what was the beginning of our Texas-Mexico evaluation. Is there's just so much potential here for economic players like a Toyota or JCB or International Navistar to find success here. So we just needed to create the predicate, lay out the reality of the market and the business opportunity here, the workforce, the most important part of that. And, I don't want to say if you build it, they'll come. But once we got that word out and other parts of Texas as well, I think it really paid off. Again, I work for the county of Bear. I live in the city of San Antonio. I think that if you look at the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and that whole zone, I mean, they have the Toyota headquarters, they have the Caterpillar headquarters, they have the Boeing headquarters. Of course, we would love to have some of that. We certainly are posturing for more growth, but it just points to the Texas strength of our ability to just, for businesses and entrepreneurs to find success here.
Yeah, we almost seem to be our own independent economy, almost like another nation state rather than something that trails the U.S. economy for better or worse. We just seem to be growing exponentially. And speaking with somebody in the comptroller's office recently, I learned that in addition to the $34 billion windfall that we had in the 2023 legislative session, David, we'll have at least $25 billion more in this session. And also, I was unaware that constitutionally, when the Rainy Day Fund was established, that at the time they put what was seen as an unattainable level of $20 billion, that once it reached that level, if it ever did, they would have to start to disperse it, at least 10% of it, I think. And we've reached it, or we will by January. And I just wonder, since the county is a state entity constitutionally, do you think very much about ways that some of that windfall should be invested in the major metro areas? We're kind of in a situation where the state Republican leaders have been at something of a war with the mayors, whether they're Democratic mayors in cities like Houston or whether they're, quote, nonpartisan mayors here, but clearly of a different political line, and we haven't seen a lot of that windfall money come our way, but there's more of it, and the scale of it's incredible. I think it's greater than something like the whole state budgets for 35 states.
Yeah. I have, I guess, complex feelings about that. I appreciate the kind of frugal nature of the state, because you can certainly create a very dangerous economic situation for yourself if you're too liberal with and I don't mean that in a political sense, but too free with the money and the programs and such, because I've learned over my years with the county, working with an amazing county manager with David Smith and his fiscal prowess, that, these costs don't go away once we create something. And they will grow just because of inflation. So we've got to be very thoughtful about what we put our money into and make sure that they are investments as much as possible. So I think in that regard, that's the biggest observation or criticism I would have, is that there are some long-standing investments that could pay dividends for the state, regardless of political persuasion or where you are, that could and should be made. And they're the obvious ones: infrastructure, power grid. There's the more social aimed, focused ones, the mental health issues and things of that nature. The public school, the versus voucher, that's going to be a big one. But these are the kinds of things that we should be investing in, that states that perform well do invest in. And I think we've kind of gone a little bit maybe cheap on some of that over the years, and now as we built up this reserve, but to your point, now that it's built, it's probably time to think about making those kinds of strategic investments in ourselves.
The I-35 traffic suggests that we have the population density to develop serious mass transit systems in the state, and I'm wondering whether or not you would see a train between San Antonio and Austin with stops in the corridor cities to be an economic development initiative as well as a mass transit improvement.
Yeah. So I've been privileged, Bob, to have gone to Japan many times in my career since 2005. I've probably been there 10 or 12 times. And I've also had the opportunity to go with the Hispanic Chamber to Spain, where they also have high-speed rail. It's probably a little more akin to Texas, because Japan is a unique place in the world. So I'm a fan of the idea of bullet trains or that kind of mass rail-based transit, but I worry that people don't understand that the reason it works so well, particularly in Japan, is it's part of a much larger network of transportation that's necessary there, because, as you know, there are 120 million people on a very relatively small island, and even smaller of which is populated. So these kinds of, even at a very small scale, the East Line, West Line, the VIA things that are being discussed are part of it. And you can't build part of a bridge over a canyon. You need the entire bridge, or it doesn't matter how well it's built. We need the total solution, and thinking about that. And then of course you have to do it in phases and stages. I think there's some interesting discussion from the Mexican President Sheinbaum about rail to the border, which could obviously benefit us and might be the catalyst that we need, because that would be, again, more like the Spain model, where the trains are going through unpopulated, more rural or even arid parts of Spain to get you to the population center. Whereas in Japan, to your point, it's city to city, and there's express trains and other things. So there's a solution there. I think there's a problem to be solved with capacity and stability of a rail line. But I recognize that there's some serious impediments to getting it done, primarily the cargo.
It will be interesting to watch President Sheinbaum in Mexico. Most people may not realize that Mexico all but eliminated rail service. They do have the tourist Chihuahua del Pacifico train, and now they have under AMLO, the president, led the efforts to get a train to the Yucatan that's still under construction in part. But the days of when you could go down to the border and take a train to Mexico City, those are long gone, but apparently they're going to return, and I think people will be excited about that. And a train from Mexico City to Monterrey to the border to San Antonio and onward would be a very exciting proposition, I think, for people.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm optimistic about Mexico, and of course there's Canada as well. There's discussions about potentially changes up there. At this conference I mentioned in Laredo, the former head of the NAD Bank here, the North American Development Bank here, Jeronimo Gutierrez, who you probably know.
Sure.
Has served as the ambassador for Mexico to the U.S. in the Trump administration first round through the USMCA negotiations. Was one of the speakers there as well, and had some very interesting remarks about how USMCA came to be, how it was negotiated, why they put this 5-year kind of sunset review of it, and pointed out that this is one of those cycles where Mexico, the U.S., and potentially Canada are all going to have leadership changes. Certainly we have had them both in Mexico and the U.S., and that the last time that happened was when NAFTA was signed. And, it isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is certainly something, because sometimes you got to break an egg to get the omelet that you're after.
Well, some eggs are going to be broken if tariffs are imposed, because that would violate the agreement as it's currently structured.
Yeah, I wish I could understand the where the line is between the rhetoric and the posturing versus the actual people who are truly watching the global economy. I mean, it seems so trite to say it these days, but NAFTA was not created for the purposes of Mexico, Canada, U.S. trade. It was for North America to be competitive against Asia and other, parts of the world. So shooting each other in the foot doesn't seem to be very productive for anybody. It doesn't benefit us in the notion that we should be partners with our neighbors, and it certainly will harm us in our ability to be globally competitive. But I get it's tied in with the immigration. It's tied in with the drug trade. It's tied in with a range of other social issues that are politically, hot button issues, and we'll see how it turns out.
I think business people from both sides of the political aisle hope that the tariffs do remain a rhetorical threat and not something that actually gets imposed. And right. We see the effects of it. I mentioned at the outset, David, that over the course of your years at the county, you oversaw the building and funding of the AT&T arena for the San Antonio Spurs, which is now the Frost Bank Center and where the Spurs are. And although you may not be directly involved in these two major downtown projects, the Western Urban one on the west side, which would lead to a new ballpark for the Missions, and then what the city has labeled Project Marvel in Hemisphere, which would be a much more expansive expansion of the convention center, the Alamo Dome, but it would include a new sports arena for the Spurs. And the county is participating to some degree, certainly in the negotiations, I think. But what will happen to the AT&T arena, or the Frost Bank Center, as we should call it now, in the event that something like that is developed in the ensuing years? Because your lease with the Spurs goes to 2032, I believe, although there's a buyout provision.
Yeah, so you're right. I was the project manager when we built the project. The special project I was on right before that was the Y2K project, to tell you how long ago it was, Bob. So in November of 1999, the voters opted to give the Spurs a new arena. And through this proposition that the county had put together under then Judge Cindy Taylor Cryer and Republican court, I think, you and I have got a little bit of gray hair on our heads, and some of the folks in this room are probably too young to remember. But the reality is, before that if you go back and look at the media, it was all the Spurs are leaving, they're going to lose them, they're going to move here, they're going to move there. And that was the primary motivation behind the way the county struck its deal. We struck the deal with the idea that we wanted to make sure that the Spurs could be successful in this smaller market, small media market. And that meant giving them an amazing financial deal, which we did. And you can argue that that's 25 years plus of success. I mean, that's a pretty good record, right? Not to mention,
four
more championships, right? Yeah. And an amazing run for the rodeo of large indoor rodeo of the year and growth and all of their key metrics. The Freeman still stands, even though many people envision that we should demolish that as well. And it serves a great purpose for us and as a community. Come May, June, every large building in the city is under great demand for graduations and trade shows. There's a whole range of things that happen now that we've got that campus built for ourselves and for the community overall. So I want to look at it all as a great success initially. When I take that approach, or when I take that perspective, I look at what might be the motivation for leaving that? The first question is it not successful today? I think from a fan perspective, I don't know anybody who thinks that the the Frost Bank Center is not a first-class, world-class facility, well-run by the Spurs, well-maintained, modern, feels fresh. I get the idea of an entertainment district. I've had the privilege to see those as we've gone to tour other buildings over the years in Los Angeles and Las Vegas and in New York. So I understand what they're after, and I think it's a ambitious plan. As a downtowner myself, I can see the merit in it. But I struggle with the kind of push to make it happen. You can obviously I have a lot of affinity for the project that I helped to oversee, and I still believe in it. And I think, again, I don't think it's broken, but I just think they're after more opportunity that hopefully they will get. I have a hard time understanding, and I'm not a part of the deal at all. I have zero visibility into it. I'm busy with other assignments that are now part of my portfolio. But with seeing how they could craft a better deal than we gave them, they get all the naming rights, they get all of the parking revenue, they get all of the concession revenue, they get most of the other nights in the building, some of which they do not count towards the building revenue. Those are revenues of the franchise or the Spurs Sports and Entertainment. And then the rodeo is in there for a couple weeks a year, but they pay into a revenue and replacement fund. I think it's $1 or $1.2 million a year. So it's a heck of a deal still, and hasn't changed. So
the Spurs have become a sports franchise with a book value in excess of $1 billion, thanks to the deal that they have had over the last 20 plus years at the arena. That's helped them become a much more profitable enterprise and a very competitive one all along the way.
I mean, and I appreciate you saying that. Full credit to the Holt family and the leadership team there, because they're a well-run organization. There's no question that franchises around the world see them and the character and the nature of their operation, and I think they've earned everything that they're getting. I never had the fear as Peter John had to kind of continually tamp down the idea that they were trying to get out of town and move to Austin. I could understand their motivation if they did, because of just the size of the market for that type of NBA fan, and all the other things that fit in with the Circuit of the Americas and all the other things in Austin. But he said he's staying. I don't have any reason to doubt his integrity or honesty. I think he's telling us exactly what he means. He and his family want to keep that franchise in San Antonio. And so I suppose if that's what it takes after 25 years from the last time we've had this, it's a pretty good record. I think you could look around the country and see the average duration of a well-run building. Most of the ones that we looked at when we built ours are still operating. Indianapolis, the Salt Lake City, Denver, they're still in the same arenas, but they do have a life cycle, and we, of course, put $100 million into it a little over 10 years ago for a technology upgrade. It's probably due more investment in that regard. The other thing I think about is the idea that there's opportunity around the Frost Bank Center grounds to build that kind of entertainment district. I looked at every square inch of land within anywhere of a couple miles of the building when I was running the project before, because we wanted to be very serious in looking at that. We did a study in partnership with the city, Emil Monsivice, and the county and some other partners did a formal evaluation of opportunities, and it's tough. It's a tough area to rebuild. If you talk about the dollars that the city is considering for this building, and you put half of that over, you probably could make something happen, but there are probably other factors at play. I'm sure the player relation thing plays into that, and just the perception of being downtown. I can understand that they want to look at it and hope it works out for the best. Now, you asked the question, what happens to the Frost Bank Center? I mean, we've known that one day there would come a day when, unless we demoed that building and built another one at the grounds, that the Spurs would have to be looking to move to their next generation building. So I think I'm optimistic. I mean, Derek Howard and Cody Davenport, amazing leaders. Both of them are going to put together, I'm sure, something very strong. Again, I'm not privy to the conversations, but I mean, rodeo organization is very strong, and I would feel very confident that they would want to have increased opportunities for themselves as well. And the key thing will be to because the other thing we did for the Spurs when we built it was gave them basically control of what we booked, right? We gave them, for all intents and purposes, we gave them our book of business. That can't remain. They can't prevent us from competing if their intention is to move. That just doesn't seem appropriate because this building needs to be able to sustaining itself. And it's an expensive building to operate compared to the Freeman Coliseum.
A lot of people in our city would like to see us compete a little bit more with that city north of us on I-35 in the music realm.
Yeah.
And, of course, the Spurs book so many dates there, it's not open for a lot of concerts when touring bands are in the state. Do you see it being acoustically lending itself to becoming a more active concert center if it were available without the Spurs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Frostbank Center certainly does. And then we have restrictions on the Freeman as well, which is a, long-standing beloved concert venue all the way back to Elvis and Kiss and Foghat and whoever else has played there,
Foghat.
So
you are dating yourself.
I know. It's like, who, But they could do the same for us. So I think any and all of those things are on the table. There's going to be opportunity. It's a fantastic facility. Again, testament to the Community Arenas Board and the county and the rodeo and the Spurs for running a first-class operation. I am very proud of that whole project and still am. That's why I would understand the notion of planning out for the future, but I don't think anybody should be of the impression that the current building isn't in first-class shape.
I agree. Well, before we run out of time, David, I want you to talk about the other side of your job, which is community development. And if you were at the city, you wouldn't have both of those titles. Those jobs would be separated with pretty large staffs, but the county is leaner, and you're both economic and community development. And just talk for a minute about what that means and the programs you're overseeing. The county's invested substantially in some areas, particularly mental health, I would say, since the pandemic, and you oversee some of that community development, don't you?
Yeah, not the mental health so much. We did also create a few years ago a public health department now that's run by a colleague and friend, Andrea Guerrero. She's doing an amazing job. And it includes some other functions that also serve the public. But yeah, Bob, I mean, we had some issues with the previous organization. There was a leadership change. The previous longstanding executive director retired, and they struggled to find a successor. So Judge Wolf asked me to take it over, whereas before I was just doing economic development completely. And so he had some ideas about improvements that could be made. So we focused a lot on these social issues. And I think the benefit of having someone like myself go in there is that I don't profess to be a social worker or an expert in that area. But because, as I'm going back to the early part of our conversation, because of the background I come from at Kelly with this process orientation and this continuous improvement orientation, I've been striving to get that kind of orientation into this social services world because most social workers aren't trained that way, right? They're trained in a transactional sort of way. This person in front of me needs help, and I'm going to evaluate them and assess them and come up with a plan of action and serve them, and then I'll move to the next one. And that's, if I'm ever in front of a social worker, I hope they treat me that way. So it's not a criticism of the process, but it is a recognition that in the context where they work organizationally, there probably is benefit if you evaluate more holistically how the overall system works. So, what do I mean by that? Let's talk about a topic that you and I are passionate about, the homelessness issue. I like to say that we really don't have a homeless problem in Bexar County because it's not a problem at all. It's a symptom of a series of other problems. And that's really important. In the world of quality control, you never solve a problem by working on the symptoms. You're looking for the root cause. So the root cause of homelessness in our community would be wrapped around the mental health and substance abuse. Maybe there are people who have a certain criminal background. A registered sex offender, for example, is never going to get a good job or a good apartment anywhere. That's just the nature of that type of crime. Whereas we're pretty forgiving on most other criminal background if someone can find redemption. But RSO is just a tough category. There are other factors out there, PTSD and other types of issues that people face.
Domestic abuse
tackling
victims.
those domestic violence, certainly, there's just a whole range of them. Some of them very well may be economic, that they just can't afford a place to stay. But for the most part, we don't evaluate them that way because I don't need to if I'm working transactionally across whomever comes into my office. But as a government, as a society, as a community, I think we should be evaluating more holistically what we're implementing and deploying, because these are many, many millions of dollars for a relatively small population. The point-in-time count will be coming up soon, and I've looked at the numbers over the last 10 years or so, and it's stable. That's a great credit to the city of San Antonio and Haven and SAM Ministries and the county and others. Of course, it doesn't mean that the population is stable because it's different people, perhaps year to year, but it's still a gigantic investment for a relatively small portion of the population. And I don't think anybody thinks we have it under control. I happened to be recently a friend of mine got me back into just bank fishing here on the San Antonio River or over at Elmendorf Lake, and you walk around from the bank and you see these encampments and the trash, and I mean it's a serious issue, and neighborhoods are affected by it, and it's of course not a downtown issue. I would say we're probably going to reach a point, if we're not already there, where the population of homeless outside of the core downtown is probably going to be larger because they're in every part of town. And yet we still have a very downtown orientation. We should. That's our tourism area. I just, walking over here from the courthouse, saw an individual having an episode, angry, yelling at a couple walking by from Mexico. They only spoke Spanish, and, there was no harm done, but it's certainly not a pleasant.
It's intimidating.
It's intimidating. It's not pleasant. So, yeah, I've kind of strayed off your initial point about the department, but that's the point. These social issues, Nelson used to say there's no better social service program than getting somebody a good job. And so that's sort of what we strive to do. We got way sidetracked by the pandemic. We were making great progress towards becoming more data-driven and more analytical about the way we deploy these social focused programs. And even though the pandemic was, 3 or 4 years ago now, we're just now getting back to the point where we can start to really delve into looking at things more systematically and formally and analytically and try to find improvements that we can make to continuously improve the outcomes that we're after.
Well, it's important work, and it's, I think, unusual that somebody has a portfolio for economic development and community development, but you do it well. And
yeah, I had a colleague in my office today, an individual I just met from Hidalgo County, McAllen area. He works for an economic development organization down there, and he had the exact same thought. He came up really to find out, how does this work? How did you wind up with this odd portfolio with our Texas strategy and Mexico strategy, and yet you have all these other functions? So it was an interesting conversation.
Well, thank you so much, David, for your service to the community, for Bexar County, and for coming on to Big City, Small Town today.
Hey, you've always been somebody I admire, Bob. I've gone back a long way, and I think you don't get enough credit for all the good things that you do for our community as well. So thanks for that.
You're kind to say so. The feeling's mutual.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you.